Uh, we are we are delighted to have for the Motivity Care webinar today, David Kuttner. We are just thrilled that he's back for a second webinar to help us get smarter. He is the founding partner of Lamson and Kuttner. They are a preeminent elder care and estate planning firm. They advise seniors and their families and people with disabilities. I think that's really important to point out. Sometimes very different challenges. And on estate planning, healthcare planning, and it also includes Medicaid planning, which is our topic today. So we want to kind of demystify this difference between Medicare and Medicaid. So welcome, David. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Mim. It's a pleasure to be with you always, and to join all of you. Thank you.
Great. So let's just dive right in. Medicare and Medicaid, they kind of sound alike, so it can be confusing. Can you explain to us what these programs are and what the differences are between them?
Yeah, that's a good question. And, I wish they had given them different names because they are so much alike. And, it's so easy to confuse them. Anyway, so Medicare, I think a lot of people are familiar with Medicare. It is a federal healthcare program that we qualify when we're 65 years of age or older, or if we are disabled and younger. Medicare is really excellent medical insurance. We've got hospitals and rehabilitation and doctors and other providers, physical therapy, occupational therapy, and so on. Really good medical insurance. If you have traditional Medicare, you probably want a supplement plan, or you can get a so-called Advantage plan that's all inclusive. But I think the emphasis here is it's medical care. And I see a lot of clients who seem to think that somehow Medicare was going to cover their long-term care needs, like having an aide in the home, or even in a nursing home. Not true. Medicare does not cover long-term care. So if you're in a hospital or in a rehab facility, when you get discharged, if you are not going to be able to continue life as it was before, because you need assistance of some kind, Medicare is not going to provide it. So the program that does provide long-term care and other healthcare needs is Medicaid. And unlike Medicare, Medicaid is a partnership program between the federal government and the state governments. And the states have really the most to say about it. We do have federal law and we do have some federal money, but what's really all important is state law and state money, because the states administer the program, and the money that the state puts in is really critical. And as we look around the country, the disparity among the states is really incredible. New York State, which undoubtedly has by far the best Medicaid program, we spend something like 25 times more per capita, 25 times more per person in our Medicaid programs than many of the states do. And you can see that just makes an enormous difference in what benefits are available to someone who needs care. In some states, their home care program is practically non-existent. In New York, it's an incredibly robust program. So we're very fortunate here. Whatever complaints we have about Medicaid, we have the best.
Well, that's nice. I know we have some folks on here from other states, so we don't want to be disparaging against any of yours, but it is important to point that out, especially if you're planning for care. So again, I think the real point is that it is state specific. And so that's why you need somebody who understands your state's Medicaid benefits in order to help really plan, appropriately. But again, I think this Medicaid, a lot of folks think, we think Medicaid, we think poor people, right? And that maybe it's second class kinds of service. Is that true?
Um, I really don't think that's true at all. I think one thing to know about Medicaid, and again, I'm a New York lawyer, so I'm not so familiar what is going on in other states. Although, just to your last point, Mim, it's not to say that other states have terrible programs. I mean, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, Florida, California. I mean, there are lots of good Medicaid programs around the country. I just think ours is better, but
You're just a little bit prejudiced about that, maybe. Okay.
but the thing about it is this, getting to your second question about it being for poor people and it's second class, um, the providers, the hospitals, um, the nursing homes, the assisted living residences, the home care agencies, these are private businesses. And if you're the owner of one of these businesses, you have a choice. Do I want to accept payment from Medicaid for my services? And so it's a business calculation. Some business owners say, well, gosh, if I didn't accept Medicaid, I'd have empty beds. I'm better off accepting some Medicaid and we'll take some private pay, and that's the best business plan. Others, and this is sort of more true about assisted living, at least in New York, you've got, I'd say, probably a majority of the facilities do not accept Medicaid, but there's still a very significant minority that do accept Medicaid. And in those facilities, they're going to take maybe a third or a half of their population will be paid for by Medicaid, but it's all the same service. I don't think anybody has any reason to complain that, I don't like my home aide because she's being paid by Medicaid. That's nonsense. If you don't like your home aide, it's because it's not a good fit, not because the employer is taking money from Medicaid. So I really just don't think that's true. And as to whether it's for poor people, yes, it is for poor people, but it's also for people who aren't poor, who don't meet the sort of poverty definition. Um, I think, something like 20 million New Yorkers are in the Medicaid program. We have lots of clients um, who aren't rich, but they aren't poor. They own a home, they have some savings. But I think the point about it is without Medicaid, those people would soon deplete their savings and put their homes in jeopardy, and maybe their spouses in jeopardy, and maybe their children in jeopardy. So we still want to support the people who maybe don't meet the definition of poverty, but still would be very dramatically affected by the need to pay for long-term care.
Yeah, and I
So
think again,
not just
yeah,
for poor people.
right. A point was made, obviously by Christine. So, some doctors will not accept Medicaid, because of the billing services. Sometimes when you get that big list, if you're coming out of the hospital of skilled nursing facilities, if that's what you need, this is where we help navigate some of that. But you make a really good point. It's finding the right facilities or the right providers, if you are using Medicaid. And I think the other thing too, that sometimes there's misconceptions about is that in order to be eligible for Medicaid, for somebody who's older in these situations, is that you have to spend down your money, right? I think a lot of us have heard this until you have almost nothing. So how can you keep and protect your money and property and still become eligible for Medicaid?
Yeah, that's a good question. We hear all the time, my plan is to spend down my money. To me, that's just not a plan. And, we also have to think about the implications of a plan like that, because, for many people, they have a spouse, they have children, maybe they have a child who has a disability or special needs. So a lot of people can be affected by the so-called spend down. And the key to
Can you
this.
define, like, I think spend down, it might be good to kind of say, when you say spend down in the context of this conversation, what do you hear? What are you hearing from people, and where do you think the big misconception is
Well,
here?
to spend down means basically spend all your money until you don't have hardly anything left, and then you'll be eligible for the Medicaid program. That's not a plan. That's a plan for devastation. You don't want that if you can avoid it. I mean, the eligibility level for Medicaid in 2024 in New York, and it may differ in other states, but currently you can have no more than $31,175 in your name. So, if you have more than that, you're not eligible for the Medicaid
And
program.
that includes, like, the value of a home?
Uh, you know, that's another sort of misconception. A lot of people think, well, my home is exempt. Your home is exempt if it's your primary residence, and if it's worth no more than $1,071,000 in New York. That number again may differ in other states. Um, but the problem is, we know with an absolute certainty that a day will come when your home is no longer your primary residence. We know that because one day we're all going to die, and if we die, the home is not our primary residence. If we go into a nursing home or an assisted living, the home is no longer our primary residence. So if we have counted on the idea that the home is exempt, uh, and we move into a nursing home or we die, it instantly becomes a Medicaid resource. And further, Medicaid will put a lien on the home and seek to be reimbursed for all of the expenses that it has incurred. So let's not foolishly leave the home in our name with the idea that it's an exempt asset. It will one day not be an exempt asset, and there's going to be a problem. Um, so spend down, not a plan, a good idea to have a plan. And that's what law firms like mine do, is we help clients plan against the risk of long-term care. And let's face it, unless you're very, very wealthy, the risk of long-term care is probably your most significant financial risk. It's the one thing that can come up that is going to cause you to deplete your life savings and put everything in jeopardy. So, it's the kind of thing we really ought to plan against it. And just to put I think, some significant statistics on this, the U.S. Department of Health tells us that for people over the age of 65, 7 out of 10 of us will need some kind of long-term care at some point. And further, that 4 out of 10 will need nursing home care. So take those odds and put them up against the cost. We see clients that are spending $5, $10, $15, $20,000 a month, not a year, a month, on their long-term care. So who can afford that? For all of us who have kind of our living expenses in balance with our means, that's the one thing that can come up that just messes everything up and puts us all in jeopardy. So really important to have a plan.
Yeah, and we did have a question, and I asked. So it's a good question. We're probably not going to go in depth into it on this webinar, but they were asking about the home, right? So can you put it in a trust? That is definitely why you want to be talking to a quality estate elder care attorney in your state that can truly talk you through that process. So thank you for that question. So we want to dive into a little bit more. So there is a Medicaid application, and we know this is one of the vehicles that your firm and all that are reputable, right? This is definitely a tool in the toolbox to help protect people's estates. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that application process is, and when somebody should be applying for Medicaid?
Okay, well, let's start out with what it's not. It's not filling out a 4-page form and submitting it.
Thank you. Yes, you're right.
It is a fairly arduous and complex process. And it's not to say that you couldn't try it yourself, but we've had some clients that did that, and most of them did not succeed, and they wasted a lot of time, which cost them a lot of money, winding up private paying while they were hoping to get into the Medicaid system. So it starts with eligibility. We can't submit an application, or it makes no sense to submit an application if we're not eligible. And here again, a lot of confusion about eligibility. It's based on your assets. And you really have to make a distinction between your income and your assets. Medicaid is not looking at income to determine your eligibility. So put aside your Social Security, your pension, your distributions from your retirement plan, your rents, whatever it is that you're receiving as income. It's not that Medicaid doesn't have something to say about it, but it's not going to affect your eligibility. So what they're looking at is basically your financial assets, checking, savings, mutual funds, stocks, bonds, cash value of life insurance, timeshares, co-ops, condos, houses, etc. That's what they're looking at, right? And put it all together, it cannot add up right now in New York to more than $31,175. Low number, right? But not a problem, because we can think about transferring ownership to somebody else. And the somebody else might be family members other than your spouse. More often, we're thinking about a trust, as you mentioned, Mim, particularly appropriate for assets like real property and co-ops and equities that are appreciating in value.
Right. And there's more than one kind of trust.
Well, we're thinking about an irrevocable trust.
Thank you. Yeah.
It's not your basic revocable or living trust, where the goal is simply to avoid probate and avoid leaving your family or your beneficiaries with the unpleasant task of going to court with a probate petition. That's your revocable trust or living trust. With the irrevocable trust, you are legally separating yourself from your assets. You put your assets in an irrevocable trust. You cannot be the trustee, the person in charge of the trust. You cannot have access to principal amounts in the trust. Therefore, Medicaid cannot count the assets in the trust as your assets when they assess your eligibility. So if we create a trust for a client and we transfer ownership of their home, whether it's a co-op, a condo, or a house. And by the way, we actually have to transfer it. You can't just write in the trust that it owns the home. There better be a deed or a share certificate that says that the trust owns it. Same for investments in cash or your stamp collection or whatever it is, you can put it in the trust. So now the trust owns everything. You own practically nothing. You're eligible for Medicaid, and you've appointed a trustee who you like and who has your best interest in mind, like your son, your daughter, your niece or nephew, or your best friend, to be your trustee. And now you're eligible for Medicaid. So you're probably thinking, I'm sure some of you, what about the look back? Isn't Medicaid going to see that I transferred money and property into my trust? Yes, they will. If you are asking for care and benefits under the community program, which includes home care, adult day care, assisted living care, it won't matter because there's no look back, at least in New York. All right. So I can't speak again for other states. You may have to deal with a look back in your state. In New York, we only have a look back for nursing home. So if you're in a nursing home and you want Medicaid to pay your nursing home bill, your application must disclose all of your financial activity for the preceding 5 years. So you've got to produce 60 monthly statements for every bank and investment account. You've got to produce your insurance policies, your trusts, your deeds, everything. And they're going to comb through all of that material, as we would too if we're preparing the application, to see whether you transferred ownership of money or property. If you did, nobody's going to get in trouble and nobody's going to get sued. Nobody says that it's improper or unethical or anything like that. Medicaid's remedy or response is simply to say, well, you transferred whatever it was, let's say it was $150,000 to your daughter within the look back period. Sorry, we're not going to pay the nursing home bill for the next 10 months. Figure it out. So that's what happens. The remedy for transfers within the look back is a period of ineligibility.
Right. So we did have a question here, David. Where are taxes more severe concerning bank assets and stocks? And then they said starting an irrevocable trust or transferring the money into a relative's name. So I think it's trust versus transferring it into somebody else's name. I believe that's the question. What's the, I mean, and my guess, you tell me.
Well, we're not, we're really not talking about a taxable event here. We're transferring principal. So unless you're someone who's already transferred or made gifts of close to $14 million in your lifetime, you're really not exposed to any tax because, well, maybe not so fast. I'm thinking of the federal gift and estate tax exemption, which is currently close to 14, what's about 13.6 million, right? So unless you've gone over that number, you're not exposed to any tax here. New York State doesn't have a gift tax, so other states may. You'd want to think about whether there's some gift tax involved in making a transfer like that. But, typically for our clients who are predominantly sort of middle class, moderate people, nobody's exposed to tax here. It doesn't matter whether you're transferring to a family member or putting it in a trust. It's the same.
Okay. So I think it's interesting for people to understand if the Medicaid application process is done right, no problems, you have the expert to do it. How long does it normally take?
Well, in terms of preparing the application, it's going to depend both on the preparer and the client because we're relying on you to provide us with a lot of documentation and information in order to put that application together. And I can tell you that the Medicaid application, when it finally is submitted, is often a pretty hefty pile of paper, when you start adding it all up. So, we need your responses, and the more prompt you are, the more prompt we are in being able to get the application submitted. And by the way, it counts from the first of the month. And then we're waiting for the caseworkers and supervisors and so on at Medicaid to review the application. They often have questions and want further documents submitted. So it may take 2, 3, even 4 months before you get an approval. Once you have your Medicaid is approved, And now we have to look at, let's get the benefit. So we need evaluations. Medicaid's going to conduct evaluations to determine if it's home care, how many hours a day you need. And so there's a whole process for that. We also need to look at what agencies we want to work with, or whether we have a caregiver who we want to employ and have that person paid by Medicaid. If it's assisted living, okay, which facility. So there's still work to be done before care is actually going to be provided.
Right. And a lot of that work too, again, is collaborative, where Motivity Care comes in and we help you kind of narrow down those options that really do meet your budget. And this is why we believe in the collaboration between working with quality providers and experts in each area of care and aging. Because it really gets to, and we're almost at the end of our conversation, but I think the really important question here is that we often see advertisements and websites about, oh, you don't need an attorney to put in a Medicaid application. What happens when you don't have somebody that really knows what they're doing?
Well, I don't want this to sound self-serving for me or other attorneys, but
Right, but why would you want
you
true legal advice?
you want somebody who knows what he or she is doing, helping you with this. And look, you don't need to be an attorney or have a law firm to prepare a Medicaid application. I think the problem is that many of these people who are advertising Medicaid services go beyond that. If they were just preparing the application for people who were Medicaid eligible, that's one thing. But the part of it that I don't like and I think is wrong is when these same people who are not attorneys and who really are not qualified to give advice about strategies to attain eligibility start advising people about eligibility and how to become eligible for Medicaid. And I think that's where we get into trouble and have problems. And frankly, I see this all the time. And things like, you asked a little bit earlier about, is the home exempt? We've had a few cases where a so-called Medicaid expert advised a customer that, don't worry about the home, it's exempt. Okay, well, a little bit later down the road, we find out that it's really not so exempt because the person moved into an assisted living and they got a lien slapped on their home. So this is the kind of thing that happens when, you're someone who's giving advice and who's not qualified to give that advice. And, actually, I just, the New York State Bar Association has a committee that's going to focus on unauthorized practice of law. And I was just asked to be the chairman of that committee. So this is a topic that the bar is going to look more closely at. And there literally are criminal penalties here for folks who engage in unauthorized practice of law. So not a good idea. If you're a social worker or a nurse or, whatever you are, if you want to prepare Medicaid applications for people who are eligible, be my guest. Please don't get involved in advising them about strategies that should be left to lawyers who know what they're doing.
Thank you for sharing that. We did have a question about trust. I encourage you to reach out to David's firm to get more information, because we are about ready to wrap up. We could probably go on for another 30 minutes easily about this topic. And we may actually have a round two, because I think there's just some other pieces of this that we'd like to get out and share with our Motivity Care Network. Thank you so much, as always, David, for your expert advice. Here at Motivity Care, whether you're caring for someone, planning ahead, or getting a plan in place for yourself, we are here to make sure that you have the right support and get to quality professional resources. We want you to reduce the time and the costs and the risks of caregiving. So we invite you to join us next month. We are honored to have Dr. Rita Stafford, and we are going to be talking about technology security for seniors. So very important topic for all of us. How do we protect those we love? And if you're aging, what do we need to be thinking about? And for all of you out there that are caregivers, thank you. Thank you for what you do. We are here to support you, and we look forward to having you back with us next month. And if you have questions, get into that caregiving crisis, give us a call. We're here to help.